Hello, I'm Tiffany, creator of Red Petal Patterns, and this is Knitting Basics for Beginners. Today I want to talk about decreases. When you are working a decrease, you are decreasing the number of stitches on your needle. This is done in order to shape the fabric you're doing. You can do this in the body of the fabric to make a three-dimensional shape, like tucking in the waist on a cardigan. You can do this at the edge of your fabric to make individual pieces that are going to get sewn together to make a three-dimensional shape versus a flat shape. You can do this on the edges of seams so that when you sew them together, they make that three-dimensional shape, but the shaping is hidden. When you do these in the body of the work, that is usually done because you're working in the round, like a raglan sweater done from the bottom up would require you to decrease at the shoulder lines. If you were working, again, a sweater that you wanted to have a smaller waist, you would decrease in and then increase back out again. There are many ways to do decreases. I'm going to show you the absolute beginner method. I am also going to explain the difference between a left-leaning decrease and a right-leaning decrease, because they will sometimes matter in your work. The reason that your right-leaning or left-leaning decrease will matter will be either because the design needs to flow one direction or the other, or because it will be hidden. It will blend in with its surroundings. If you do it the opposite way of how it's suggested, you'll see little pick marks or little tiny purl marks along that decreased seam. That's not the end of the world. It really is not going to be that big of a deal, and it's something that you'll pick up over time and understand better the more you understand your method of knitting better. So it's okay to just start with just the basic knit two together. And that's what most decreases are, is a knitting two stitches together at the same time. There are differences. If you remember, we talked about the front loop and back loop and how your stitch sits on your needle. When you're doing two stitches together, they need to face the same direction in order to knit them together. And that's where you're going to get things like slip, knit, pass the slip stitch over, which is all SKPSSO words. It's very long acronyms. And all that means is that you want to make sure that your stitches are all facing the same direction in the direction you want them to go. The way that you make leaning stitches is the direction that you're putting your needle in. So when I knit, I'm going from front to back, but I'm going this direction through both needles, through both loops. So I'm going to go from the right to the left, and again from the right to the left. So I'm doing the right loop and the right stitch, then the left stitch that I'm knitting together. And that, because my needle is pointed that direction, left, this decrease will lean to the left when I get done. My stitches are still leaning this direction. So in order to make them lean this direction, I will need to take this one off, but turn it. So instead of the left loop being in front, I'm going to turn it so that now the left loop is in the back. I'm going to do that one more time up here if it'll focus. So I'm going to go in from the back, catch that right loop, and now that will be on the front of this needle, and turn it around. So now when I put these back on this needle as they lay, now the right loop is in front instead of the left loop. And I can go in both stitches and take the left one, then the right one, both stitches, and my needle is now pointed this way. So when I yarn over, they now lean towards the right. That is how you make your decreases lean, is if you take this direction and take the right stitch, then the left stitch, and you work those, they will lean this direction. If you take your needle and turn those stitches around so that you can go from the left stitch to the right stitch this direction, even though it still looks like this, but when you put the needle in, you went this direction, then finished your stitch. Then your stitches will lean this way. And that is all those complicated letters, that is all it means, is the direction that your stitches are facing so that you can take both of them at the same time. I'm also going to show you what happens if you don't turn your stitches around and you end up twisting them. You will not get, they will still lean that direction. So these will still lean to the right, but you see I will have a little bar here. And on my next round, this little bar will look like a purl bump because I didn't turn my stitches around before I did it. Not the end of the world. You can see that that stitch is slightly twisted. If I can get my camera to focus, you'll see that this stitch is slightly twisted and it will show up as a purl bump later. Again, not the end of the world. I wouldn't stress too much about it. But that is what they mean when they say K2TOG is knit two together, or sometimes it's K2T, and that's knit two together, and other times it'll say slip knit pass the slip stitch over, which is SKPSSO. Really long way to just say knit two together, left leaning, or not even to say knit two together, to say a left leaning decrease or a right leaning decrease. Now, the reason that I don't like using those acronyms is because, as we've discussed before, if your stitches are sitting differently, then the slipping, knitting, and passing the slip stitch over won't work in the way that it was written. It won't go the direction they want it to go when they saw it. So sometimes if you can look at the picture, you can tell whether or not the stitches lean towards or away from whatever it is. You can tell that the stitches are leaning one direction or the other. Again, not the end of the world. It's just that it will not turn out the way you expected it to. It won't look like the picture if your stitches are going the different direction than what the author wrote. Again, that is why I always write a left-leaning decrease or right-leaning decrease, or away from or towards a landmark in your pattern. So that is a decrease in the middle of the fabric, or turn these stitches around, put them back on, and knit them the other direction. Those are decreases in the middle of your fabric, and you can see one leans to the left and the second one leans to the right. You cannot do two decreases next to each other if they point towards each other, because you will end up getting a hole in the middle, and then that hole will continue all the way up as you do decreases towards it. You need to leave a space. You can't have them right next to each other even if they're not pointing at each other. I'm sorry, that was worded wrong. You would put a space between, so you would do your decrease. You need to have at least one stitch, and then do your decrease the same or other direction. Now, if they're both going the same direction and you need to decrease 2 stitches next to each other on the same row, you can do that. You just can't have stitches leaning towards each other or away from each other right next to each other. You can have them both go the same direction next to each other, but you can't have them going this way or this way next to each other, because you will leave a hole in the middle. You can do your stitches in the body of your work all the way across, and I'm going to do another one, and then I'm going to face them the other direction. So when I say the needle is pointing left to right or right to left, what I mean is I'm taking the right stitch, then the left stitch together, or I'm going to turn them around and do the left stitch and then the right stitch. And when that settles, you'll see that they lean back and forth in different directions. So you can do that in the body of your work, and you can do it on the edges. When you're working on the edges, typically you want to leave what is called a selvage stitch. This is worked in several different ways. Sometimes that's the stitch that gets knitted every single time. Sometimes, whether you're on the front side or the back side. Sometimes that is the stitch that gets worked on a right side row. At the end of the row, it'll get worked. When you turn it around and it's at the beginning of the row, it just gets slipped and doesn't get worked. Sometimes this edge stitch, if it's going to be seen, is going to be slipped or worked in some sort of roll, like an I-cord. The reason being is because if you do your regular knit and purl and your regular knit and purl, that is a very unattractive edge. If you're going to be sewing it, you will knit it every time, because that gives you a clean line to sew into. Sometimes you will always purl that. So you're going along, knit, 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 and then you'll purl that last stitch so that it sticks out differently, and then you're able to find it when you go to sew your seams together. If it's going to be seen, however, and it's not going to be stitched to another edge, then you want to do some sort of edge stitching that would require you to slip or work into an I-cord or some sort of lace or whatever your pattern calls for. But that is why it will generally have you do your decrease one stitch in from the edge and then go to the last 3 stitches and work your decrease, meaning you would work these 2 together and then your selvage piece. And that is why it would be worded that way. Work to the last 3 stitches, make your decrease, and work. And as you do these, either on the edge, your piece will be flat in the middle and will work its way into a triangle, or in the middle, it will be straight in the middle, and your stitches, your rows, your columns will all lean in towards that center ridge. And you'll see those on sweaters, like raglan sleeve sweaters. And that's all there is to decreases. They're pretty simple. It's kind of hard to mess that up. Even if you make it lean the wrong direction, it generally won't be the end of the world. It may not look like the picture, but unless you're doing a complicated lace or some kind of complicated directional swirl that's supposed to go a certain way, it won't really matter. And it's something that over time it'll kind of stick in your head, the muscle memory of how to do it. And it'll just be by sight, you'll realize that that's how you're supposed to do it. But when you're first learning, it's not tragic, it's not a big deal. Just get the 2 stitches together. When you come around after doing that, and you come around to the purl side, you just knit those, just purl those stitches across like any other row. There's absolutely no difference after that, after you've knitted them together, after you've decreased them. There's no difference there. And that is decreases, and that's all there really is to talk about. And I will see you next time for increases, which will be far more exciting. Bye.